A while back, I was in the middle of researching another episode, and I stumbled across a short but very interesting story. I saved it to my growing list of stories that I still need to organize into episodes, but it's just kind of stuck with me ever since. The account comes from the autobiography of Osbert Stilwell, who served as an officer in the British Army during the First World War. Shortly before the war began, in 1914, Stilwell and some of his officer buddies were enjoying a night out on the town when they decided to visit one of those palm-reading fortune tellers. The men were really just looking for a good laugh and didn't take the whole thing seriously. But as the fortune teller looked at the hands of Stilwell's friends, she became confused and concerned. In their palms, she said she saw nothing. Where there should have been a future, outlined in the details and contours of their hands, she only saw black nothingness. At the time, the officers just rolled their eyes at what was clearly a cheap gimmick. But according to Stilwell, the men whose palms had been blank, all of them were killed just a few days later, after they returned to the front lines. Whether we think that it's coincidence or not, for soldiers like Stilwell, it was a chilling experience. But why his story stuck with me is because after I started going back through all of the stories I've read, I'm beginning to realize that it's not a unique experience. Scattered throughout the personal writings of soldiers and civilians across wartime history, there are hundreds of recorded experiences with strange dreams, strange visions, and uncanny feelings of looming dread. Of course, surrounded by the kinds of death and mayhem that many of these people were, it's understandable why they would have these experiences. But for the people at the center of these stories that I'm going to share with you, their dreams and visions ended up coming true in remarkably accurate detail. For whatever reason that we can't begin to understand or offer an explanation for, these are true stories about men who knew when and how they would die, and there was nothing they could do to stop it.
I'm telling you, it was the strangest thing. In the dream, I'm up in my kitty hawk, yeah? Feeling the engine roar, the heat through the canopy like it's real life. Suddenly, she just keels over on me, and I'm diving straight for the dirt. I hit the ground, boom! And I wake up shaking and sweating bullets.
I wouldn't worry about it, mate. Just a dream is all.
Yeah, but who the hell dreams about crashing aeroplanes? Why not Rita Hayworth or Vivian Lee? Wouldn't mind a nighttime visit from either of them.
Yeah, wouldn't we all? Look, it's part of the job, right? Things can go wrong, so it's always in the back of your mind. That's what dreams do sometimes. They take these wee little worries and blow them straight up.
That's the thing, though. I never dream. Never. Yeah, you're right. It's just a dream.
This first story can be found in Kevin Desmond's 1988 book, Aviation Ghosts, Stories of Paranormal Activity Along Lines South by Southeast, 165 Degrees. In his efforts to better explore the legends, ghost stories, and psychic phenomena associated with aviation history, Desmond put out a call in various newspapers and magazines, asking pilots, ground crew, anyone to write in their aviation-related ghost stories, and he wasn't disappointed by the many responses he received. In the small mountain of story submissions piling up on his desk, there was one particularly chilling story that was mailed in by a Royal Air Force veteran named Bob Lacey. Bob had served during World War II, and in his letter, he recalled a strange conversation he had with a fellow pilot while they were stationed in North Africa in the spring of 1943. Bob writes,
"In West Africa, at Easter 1943, I was employed as personal pilot to the resident minister, Lord Swinton. My base, although I spent most of my time in Accra, was Takoradi, which was the assembly base for American fighter aircraft destined for North Africa. These aircraft, mainly Curtiss P-40 Warhawks, were assembled and tested by pilots on the station and then air ferried to Cairo. On the Sunday, I was down at the airfield with one of the test pilots and a South African pilot. Both were particular friends of mine at the time. The RAF test pilot, during conversation, said he had dreamt about an aircraft crash the night before and seemed rather troubled by it. We said there was nothing strange about that, as aeroplanes were crashing all the time. "I know," he said, "but surely one doesn't dream about aeroplane crashes." We both said that we did, and that there was nothing odd at all about it. "Ah," he said, "but I never dream." The next afternoon, I was leaving the officers' mess when I saw a tall pillar of smoke rising from the direction of the harbour. I rang down to flights and was told that a Warhawk had crashed and the pilot had been killed. The pilot was the flight lieutenant who had had the dream. I suddenly felt I had seen through a curtain.
Come in, Boac Flight. This is Weather Observer, over.
I read you, Weather Observer. This is Boac Flight. Send your traffic, over.
We have an unknown radar contact that seems to be tailing you. Do you have eyes on this aircraft, over?
Stand by. Alan, can you peek through the Astrodome and tell me if you see another aircraft with us?
Negative, sir. Clear skies for miles around. No aircraft in sight.
Weather Observer, we don't see anyone up here. What altitude is the contact at? Over.
6 years later, in 1949, I was working with Scottish Airways as an airline captain. We had been contracted by the BOWAC, the British Overseas Airways Corporation, to crew one of their Liberator freight aircraft on the North Atlantic service between Prestwick and Montreal. One night on the flight to Montreal, we were in radio telephone contact with one of the weather ships, which suddenly called us and asked if we had another aircraft in sight. It was a very clear, starlit night, and we all began a big search for the aircraft, which was reported by the weather ship's radar contact as being 1 mile behind us. The navigator could see nothing in the Astrodome, so I circled, upon which the weather ship reported that the following aircraft was also circling behind us. We continued on course for Montreal, having seen nothing. And after a while, the weather ship, which had been keeping track of the unseen aircraft, called and said, "It's now fading from the screen." I never discovered what it was and imagine it must have been a spurious echo. But we did have a coffin on board in the hold that night. No one was keen to leave the cockpit after that and go back to brew up in the galley. That is the sum total of actual experience I have had in a flying life, covering nearly 16,000 hours in war and peace. But for some time before I retired from airlines, I would often wake and have a strong feeling that there had been a disaster. Every time this happened, there had indeed been a major air accident. In cold print, nothing very much. The effect on me as a person on these occasions was a different matter. It did not bother me, but gave me a strange feeling that there is much more to life than we are prepared to admit.
Dude, how many times have I got to tell you to stop bringing that shit up?
Look, I'm asking you as a friend, all right? Just in case anything happens to me, I want you to make sure my stuff gets back to my folks, okay?
Yeah, and as your friend, I'm telling you that you've lost your damn mind. Look, I get it. We've been in country a while. It's okay to be a little stressed out, man. But it was just a dream, all right? Hell, with all the insane shit we've seen around here, I'd be surprised if you weren't seeing Charlie in your sleep.
I don't know, man. Like, yeah, I've been telling myself that it was just a dream. But I really can't shake the thought that something bad's about to happen.
I mean, when's the last time anything good happened around here?
Yeah, that's true. This next story can be found in the book Very Crazy GI, Strange But True Stories of the Vietnam War by Craig Jorgensen. When I first read it, this account jumped out at me as being eerily similar to another story that we've previously covered, that of an Australian soldier named Albert Davey. While serving in the First World War, Davey, who was known to be a strong and level-headed NCO, was suddenly overcome by an unexplainable sense of looming dread. It was as if he knew, with absolute certainty, that his time was up. Davey was usually a very bright and cheerful kind of guy, so his change in mood didn't go unnoticed. But despite his officers and fellow soldiers trying to reassure him, Davey just seemed very certain. Calm as he was when he told them, he was convinced that the next assault that they would do would be his last. And it was, much to the shock and chilling confusion of his commanding officer, who later shared the experience that had stayed with him for decades after the war. This next story takes place in 1969, involving an American soldier serving in the jungles of Vietnam. As he's not named in Jorgensen's book, we'll simply refer to him as John. John was a U.S. Army Ranger and second in command of a 5-man recon element. His team was stationed in the Phuc Long province of South Vietnam. John was also well-liked. He was considered a strong leader, always seemed to smile through even the most difficult circumstances, and his fellow soldiers all looked up to him. So when John suddenly became very sullen, the men around him knew that something must be bothering him. But when they asked him what was on his mind, the answer he gave was unsettling. They knew John was superstitious, as many soldiers could be, but this was odd, especially for someone as optimistic as he usually was. According to John, he had had a series of vivid and recurring nightmares in which he saw himself bleeding to death on the jungle floor. The dreams were so real and frequent that John became convinced that they weren't dreams at all. He took them to be visions of his own death. The Rangers were only a few days out from a 5-day long-range patrol mission, and John's sudden fatalist outlook wasn't doing much to boost morale. What made it worse was that on the day before the team was due to step off on the patrol, John started going around the camp and saying goodbye to his friends and giving away his personal belongings. First Sergeant Tony Cortez, who was a close friend of John's, recalled what happened in an interview he gave some years after the war.
He was serious, and nothing we could do would talk him out of it. You could see that he believed it, and the odd thing was that he wasn't afraid. If anything, he accepted it.
On November 17, 1969, 2 days into the long-range patrol, John's visions would become a reality. His team was ambushed by the Viet Cong, and John was hit multiple times. He died exactly as the dreams he told his friends about had indicated, bleeding out on the jungle floor. While stories like John's, Davies, and the unknown RAF pilot of Bob Lacey's account are eerily common in times of war, it can be argued that any soldier in a combat environment could predict his own death with reasonable accuracy, and maybe some of them would be right. But this strange wartime phenomena isn't limited to men serving in frontline combat. Looking through the historical records filed under Strange and Unexplained, the file cabinet that holds all of the names starting with the letter L includes one of America's most legendary wartime commanders. Few American leaders have been killed while serving in office, and even fewer ever mention knowing it would happen. As it turns out, the 16th President of the United States did. Of all the men that have called the White House home, few have left their mark on American history quite like Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln is a man that needs no introduction, and the stories surrounding his life and presidency have become the stuff of legend. Elected to office in 1860, just before the outbreak of the Civil War, it was Lincoln's steadfast leadership that prevented a splitting of the nation after 4 bloody years of conflict. While Lincoln's motivations and the war's objectives did evolve over time, many consider the true highlight of his time in office to be the passing of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. This proclamation is what effectively brought an end to slavery in the United States. Although he is now widely regarded as one of America's greatest presidents, Lincoln was a controversial figure during his time, facing opposition from various factions. His progressive outlook towards the abolishment of slavery made him a number of enemies, especially in the South. So although his leadership saved the country, his presidency would end with his assassination. There are thousands of books, essays, and films detailing Lincoln's policies and time in office. But what is often overlooked is his complex and fascinating relationship with faith and the paranormal. Lincoln was born into a very devout Baptist family. From a very young age, people recalled him preaching passionate sermons. He could recite whole passages of the Bible by heart. But as he got older, his outlook on religion became much more complicated. Abraham Lincoln was, without doubt, a man of strong religious conviction, just not in the way that many other people were at the time. While he believed in God and divine providence, Lincoln never tied himself to one church or denomination. In fact, he actually seemed a bit wary of organized religion in general. Even as a youth, Lincoln questioned the many contradicting interpretations of the Bible held by different Christian groups. Each church boldly claimed that their perspective, and theirs alone, was the truth. But the way Lincoln expressed it, he never felt as if he fully agreed with any of their doctrines, and rejected many of the traditional Christian views. In Lincoln's eyes, the will of God wasn't so clear-cut, and he worked in ways that were simply above human understanding. Lincoln's inquisitive outlook on faith made him what might be considered a skeptic. This became very clear when anyone came forward claiming to be a messenger of God, or to be someone who could communicate with the spirit world. When 11-year-old William Lincoln died of typhoid fever in early 1862, both of his parents were devastated. But while Abraham Lincoln found comfort through his faith in God and otherwise buried his grief in the duties around the ongoing Civil War, his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, took a much more unique approach to grieving. At this point in the late 19th century, spiritualism, the idea that you could communicate with the spirits of the dead, was all the rage, and Mrs. Lincoln was completely bought in. After William died, much to the disapproval of her husband, she invited a number of self-described psychic clairvoyants to the White House to reach beyond the veil and speak with her dead son. I spoke with a guy who moved to the States from Cuba about a year ago, and after he picked me up at the airport as we drove through Austin, Texas, I asked him about his thoughts on things like the paranormal and religion. He started by sharing his own skepticism, but then he also shared an experience that I guess had started to change his mind. After his grandmother had died, he was invited by a friend to meet with a psychic. He only went along half-heartedly, not planning on participating but just to watch. At some point during the seance, or whatever it was that they were doing, he said the psychic began speaking to him. But he said it was very strange, because this woman, who he had never met, had suddenly taken on the exact mannerisms and way of speaking to him that his grandmother had. He said she even answered his questions about things that he knew that only his grandmother could have known. He just told me in no uncertain terms, "That woman became my grandma, and I have no idea how she could do that." But when I continued to ask questions, he made it clear that he still wasn't sure what he believed about spirits, religion, or the paranormal in general. I say that to point out that while some psychics do of course try to ply an honest trade in spiritualism, regardless of what we think about it, it was clear that the ones who responded to Mary Todd Lincoln's request were the more unscrupulous types. clearly trying to exploit a grieving mother for their own financial gain. Apparently, Abraham Lincoln thought so as well. Lincoln sat in on a few of these seances, often held in the White House's Red Room. Out of respect, even though he didn't believe a word of what was being said, he kept his mouth shut. He was there to support his wife, and if this was what helped her cope with William's loss, then so be it. But according to Lincoln's close friend, General Daniel Sickles, there was at least one occasion where the president just couldn't help himself. After this particular seance had ended, Sickles recalled Lincoln and Mary Todd having a heated debate about what they had experienced earlier that day. Apparently, the psychic medium, who supposedly had no experience playing the piano, was guided by the hands of the spirits to play a tune. And while he did this, the piano was shifting and jumping around under the power of unseen hands. But Lincoln didn't buy it, and so later, to hammer home his point, he marched over to a nearby piano, pounded on the keys, and, using his knees, moved the piano around just like the medium had done. He then turned to his wife while he was doing this and shouted, "See, Mother, our piano can dance too." While Lincoln was clearly not won over by the mediums and spiritists taking money from his wife, his playful skepticism at that moment stood in stark contrast to his own experiences with the unexplained, namely the visions that haunted him throughout the war. Lincoln was tormented by a certain dream. In it, he found himself alone on a small boat floating down a river, surrounded by a thick fog. He had no idea where he was going, and the boat had no oars or a rudder for him to change direction. He was just going deeper and deeper into the fog towards an unknown destination. After experiencing this same exact dream several times, which almost always seemed to happen on the eve of a significant military operation, Lincoln finally confided in his wife about them. In spite of her own superstitions, Mary Todd assured him that the dreams were simply manifestations of his wartime stress. After all, he was, in a way, guiding the nation through a fog, down a river of unknown waters towards an uncertain future. Lincoln agreed with his wife and put the dreams out of his mind, at least for a while, until a much more disturbing series of visions started to come to him.
Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? Molly, darling? Where are you? Soldier. What's the meaning of all this? Who is dead in the White House?
The president.
What?
He was killed by an assassin.
In the days following the Union's victory, which marked the end of the Civil War, Lincoln started to experience another eerie, recurring nightmare. He described the dream in his personal journal, offering enough detail to indicate that these visions were clearly vivid.
I retired late. I soon began to dream. There seemed to be a death-like stillness about me. Then I heard subdued sobs, as if a number of people were weeping. I thought I left my bed and wandered downstairs. There, the silence was broken by the same pitiful sobbing, but the mourners were invisible. I went from room to room. No living person was in sight, but the same mournful sounds of distress met me as I passed along. It was light in all of the rooms. Every object was familiar to me. But where were all the people who were grieving as if their hearts would break? I was puzzled and alarmed. What could be the meaning of all this? Determined to find the cause of a state of things so mysterious and so shocking, I kept on until I arrived at the East Room, which I entered. Before me was a catafalque on which rested a corpse wrapped in funeral vestments. Around it were stationed soldiers who were acting as guards, and there was a throng of people, some gazing mournfully upon the corpse whose face was covered, others weeping pitifully. "Who is dead in the White House?" I demanded of one of the soldiers. "The president," was his answer. "He was killed by an assassin." Then came a loud burst of grief from the crowd, which awoke me from my dream. I slept no more that night, and although it was only a dream, I have been strangely annoyed by it ever since.
In contrast to his usual stoicism, Lincoln was left feeling unnerved. These could just be dreams, and nothing more than that. But being a man of faith, he couldn't help but wonder if God was trying to tell him something. Mary Todd once recalled a conversation she had with her husband about dreams, in which he said, quote,
"It is strange how much there is in the Bible about dreams. If we believe the Bible, we must accept the fact that in the old days, God and his angels came to men in their sleep and made themselves known by dreams."
Mary said that after their conversation, Abraham opened his Bible to see if its words could offer any insight. Oddly enough, the first page he opened to was the book of Genesis, chapter 28, which contained the verses about Jacob's dream. After fleeing his home to escape from his brother Esau, Jacob needed to stop for the night. That night, he dreamt of seeing a great ladder stretching all the way from the ground up to the heavens, with the angels ascending and descending on it. According to Lincoln, in this same way, every time he closed and reopened the Bible, he'd find himself staring at a passage relating to dreams and visions. The more this dream occurred to him, his wandering through the White House, seeing the corpse, and hearing about an assassination, the more Lincoln became convinced that it was in fact a clear premonition of his own approaching death. On the evening of April 14, 1865, W.H. Crook, a 25-year-old bodyguard, escorted the president back to the White House after a long day of War Department meetings. Crook was excited to have the rest of the night off, and his attention might well have been elsewhere. But Lincoln's behavior was enough to catch it. Crook couldn't help but notice that the president was acting differently, more quiet and uncharacteristically serious. After a time of quiet walking, the president seemed to come back to his more talkative self. It was at that point that Lincoln confided in Crook, telling him that for the past 3 nights, he had been dreaming about his own assassination. Crook could tell that Lincoln was unsettled by the dreams. Crook also knew that the president was scheduled to see a performance of the popular comedy, Our American Cousin, that night at Ford's Theater. After hearing about Lincoln's dreams, Crook urged him to rest and not attend the performance. But as Crook recalled many years later, in 1907, Lincoln was adamant about attending the show.
"It has been advertised that we will be there," he said, "and I cannot disappoint the people. Otherwise, I would not go. I do not want to go." I remember particularly that he said this because it surprised me. The president's love for theater was well known. He went often when it was announced that he would be there, but more often he would slip away, alone or with his son Tad, get into the theater, unobserved if he could, watch the play from the back of the house for a short time, and then go back to his work. Mr. Buckingham, the doorkeeper of Ford's Theater, used to say that he went in just to take a laugh, so it seemed unusual to hear him say he did not want to go. When we reached the White House and he had climbed the steps, he turned and stood there a moment before he went in. Then he said, "Goodbye, Crook." It startled me. As far as I remember, he had never said anything but "Good night, Crook" before. Of course, it is possible that I may be mistaken. In looking back, every word that he said has significance. But I remembered distinctly the shock of surprise and the impression at the time that he had never said it before. By this time, I feel queer and sad. I hated to leave him. But he had gone in, so I turned away and started on my walk home.
As Lincoln had so strangely announced it, it would be the last time Crook ever spoke to the president. That night, Lincoln, along with Mary Todd, Major Henry Rathbone, and his fiancée, went to Ford's Theater. And the rest, as they say, is history. Lincoln's verified reports of visions foreshadowing his own death are certainly compelling. By the end of the 19th century, Sigmund Freud would offer a more scientific approach to the interpretation of dreams. Freud primarily posited that dreams are a manifestation of unconscious desires, thoughts, and motivations, a road to the deeper subconscious mind. Freud did believe that dreams are largely symbolic, such as the example of Lincoln's dreams about taking a boat ride down a dark, foggy river, and his wife's interpretation about wartime stress. However, Freud of course said nothing to the effect that dreams had any ability to predict the future. Modern science posits that dreams are simply the result of random nerve cell activity and do not inherently mean anything, or that they are otherwise the result of our brains processing information while we sleep. At least in Freud's view, our dreams, if studied, could offer us a better understanding of our subconscious mind, our inner person. But whatever science says, in many cultures, dreams have always been regarded as something profound. Looking into the 19th century history of Native American tribes, particularly the Sioux people of the Great Plains, dreams and visions were regarded with a great deal of respect. They were taken as direct messages from the spirit world, sent forward by their ancestors or the Great Spirit, Wakantanka, itself. In Sioux culture, dreams were said to play an important role in everyday life. Not only did they serve to help guide individuals along their life path, but they also influenced the decisions of elders, chiefs, and other community leaders. For the Sioux, being one with nature went hand in hand with connecting to the spirit world around them. As an important rite of passage, every young warrior had to embark on what was called a spirit quest or vision quest. After enduring a lengthy period of spiritual and physical preparation with the help of the tribe's medicine man, the young man would venture out to a sacred site chosen by the elders. Once there, they would fast and pray for days on end, hoping to make contact with the spirit realm. In 1854, there was one notable Sioux who made his way across the open plains on such a quest. His long, wavy black hair had earned him the nickname Curly among his friends and family, but history would soon know him by another name, Crazy Horse. A mere 2 days into his vision quest, the young Crazy Horse was already having difficulty in completing it. Unlike the other young men who would spend months physically and mentally preparing for their quests, Crazy Horse stubbornly ignored the advice of his elders and went off on his own. He was eager to get started and to earn his place as a warrior. Now he was hungry, dehydrated, and sleep-deprived. He was no closer to making contact with the spirits, at least not before he died from thirst. But just as the young Sioux was about to give up and return to his tribe in defeat, something happened. He was walking down a hill to reach his pony, which was resting by the lake. Suddenly, he passed out, but his mind remained conscious. The sudden darkness slowly returned to the same bright hill country and lake as before, but it was strange. As Crazy Horse watched in amazement, his pony emerged out of the lake, appearing to float and dance on the surface of the water. Riding the pony was the figure of a man. This warrior was dressed simply, without face paint, with his hair down and a single feather in it, with a small brown stone visible behind his ear. As the warrior charged forward, bullets and arrows flew around him, yet neither he nor his horse were hit. The vision then changed. A thunderstorm appeared over the warrior, his people around him trying to hold him back, but he broke free from their hold. Lightning then struck him, leaving a lightning symbol on his cheek. White marks resembling hailstones also appeared on his body. The warrior then spoke to the young Crazy Horse standing on the shore, his voice filling the boy's mind. He told Crazy Horse that as long as he dressed modestly, his tribesmen did not touch him, and he did not take any scalps or war trophies, he would not be harmed in battle. His horse's tail must be left untied, with no paint or dust markings being made on his coat. Crazy Horse then heard a red-tailed hawk shrieking in the distance. He then woke up by the side of the lake. The vision had ended. He looked up in the sky and saw the same hawk flying overhead. Crazy Horse's father later interpreted the vision, explaining that the warrior in the vision was Crazy Horse himself. The lightning bolt on his cheek and the hailstones on his body were meant to become his war paint. The vision provided guidance and a deep understanding of his role as a protector of the Lakota people. He was also given a sacred song that the Oglala people still sing today, and from the vision they derived his name, which became a part of American history. Tashunka Witko, which in English translates to Crazy Horse. Around a decade after Crazy Horse's vision quest, when the American Civil War ended in 1865, the U.S. Army shifted its attention west towards the Great Plains. As more and more settlers pushed into the region, they were met with increasingly violent resistance from bands of indigenous warriors attempting to defend their lands. Of the many leaders who rallied their people, few were as notorious as Crazy Horse. Inspired by his devotion to traditional Sioux and Lakota ways and his selfless way of leadership, thousands of his fellow warriors joined Crazy Horse in his fight against American forces. Always in the middle of the action, Crazy Horse's bold tactics led to a number of native victories. One of these became known as the Fetterman Fight of 1866. Crazy Horse and his men lured a number of Captain William Fetterman's troops into an ambush just outside of Fort Phil Kearny in Wyoming. In the gunfight that followed, 81 American troops were killed in what was, at the time, the worst defeat suffered by the U.S. Army at the hands of native forces. This would later be overshadowed by Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull's massacre of General George Custer's 7th Cavalry at the Little Bighorn in 1876. Despite constantly exposing himself to danger and having several near misses, Crazy Horse seemed invincible. Time and time again, both American soldiers and native warriors marveled at how the man could charge through hails of bullets, arrows, and cannon fire, and somehow emerged completely unscathed. Either Crazy Horse was one of the luckiest men alive, or, as many Sioux believe, he was being guided and protected by the spirits. Following the instructions given in his vision, Crazy Horse always rode into battle with a single feather in his hair and a small stone tied behind his ear. He dressed modestly, and his horse's tail was always left untied. On his face, he painted the same lightning bolt, while he dotted his chest and arms with white paint resembling hailstones. Though it completely defies explanation, it does seem that in every instance where Crazy Horse followed the spirit's guidelines, he was never so much as grazed by a single bullet. In fact, the only times Crazy Horse ever accounted for being injured on the battlefield were the instances when he neglected to follow the spirit's instructions. Crazy Horse recalled one instance when he was caught up in the excitement of battle. He was attempting to take the scalps off 2 dead soldiers when an arrow flew out of nowhere and struck him in the leg. As he limped to take cover, his hand pressed over the bleeding wound. Crazy Horse was sharply reminded of the spirit's words, to never take what wasn't his on the battlefield. But even while Crazy Horse's legendary vision seems to have ensured his safety, the same vision appears to have simultaneously predicted the way he would die. Because of his many victories, Crazy Horse had a lot of enemies, even beyond those in the U.S. Army. Despite his widespread popularity among the Sioux and Lakota, there were many indigenous leaders who disagreed with Crazy Horse's aggressive stance against the encroaching Americans. Tribe leaders such as Red Cloud and Spotted Tail grew tired of the fighting and wanted to pursue a more diplomatic approach to saving what was left of their ancestral lands. In their eyes, continued war against the United States would only result in the total destruction of their people and all the native peoples throughout the country. Using their deep connections within the Sioux Lakota Nation, many times Red Cloud and Spotted Tail attempted to convince Crazy Horse to lay down his arms and surrender to U.S. authorities. Determined as he was, Crazy Horse flatly refused. In September of 1877, however, Crazy Horse and his loyal fighters seemed to have finally reached their limit. After months of being relentlessly pursued by federal troops and weakened to the point of starvation, in an effort to save his men, Crazy Horse surrendered to American forces. But his surrender was only half-hearted. While he was being escorted to a guardhouse on Fort Robinson, Crazy Horse attempted to break free from the guards. Another Oglala Sioux warrior, named Little Big Man, told him to stop. What he was doing was reckless. As Crazy Horse then fought to free himself, an army soldier charged in and drove his bayonet deep into Crazy Horse's back. The wound would be fatal. Crazy Horse died later that same day, just before midnight on September 5th, 1877. In the vision that initiated his life as a warrior, Crazy Horse had watched the man on the lake fend off the desperate arms of his own people as they seemed to cling to him, trying to hold him back from something. Whether this might have represented his fellow tribes trying to stop him from fighting with the U.S. Army, or the reality of Little Big Man desperately clinging to him in his final moments, is of course left to interpretation. But to some, Crazy Horse is another soldier whose early death seems to have been predicted by the unseen forces at work in the world. While unique in many ways, the stories of Lincoln, Crazy Horse, and the soldiers who foresaw their own deaths share a common thread, a glimpse beyond the veil of the known, a brush with destiny that defies explanation. Whether through dreams, visions, or chilling premonitions, before they died, these individuals experienced a profound connection to their own mortality. Whether we take these stories as evidence of the paranormal or simply as interesting looks into the human psyche, their experiences serve as a reminder of the unseen forces that may well be shaping our own lives at this very moment, and the many mysteries in this world that lie just beyond our understanding.